One bishop accused the SSPX of becoming practically another Protestant sect. Now, however, some argue that those words describe someone else, because to many, that word, Protestant, resounds like a boomerang. And the question they're asking is reversed. What if Protestantism had entered, if anything, from the other side? By the end of this video, you'll be faced with two opposing arguments, with both sides making the exact same accusation. And you'll understand why the true stakes lie behind one word. Let's start with the facts, without exaggerating anything. In a video, Bishop Thomas Paprocki of the Diocese of Springfield, Illinois, explained what he believes is the real problem with the society. Not the ancient Mass itself, he clarifies. The problem, he says, is another: disobeying the Pope and rejecting the teachings of the Second Vatican Council. And from there, the cutting conclusion. By disobeying the Pope and rejecting the Council, the society has essentially become another Protestant sect, which thinks it is right, while the Pope is wrong. And he adds a striking fact. Today, there are 53,000 Christian denominations, but Christ founded only one. The proliferation of groups, he says, doesn't reform the Church, it divides it. This is the first side of the argument. And to be fair, it's not a baseless accusation. There's a real point. Because disobedience to the Pope is real, the society has consecrated bishops against the pontiff's will, and this is a serious matter, not a mere detail. On this point, the bishop touches a real nerve. But here's the other side, the one that turns the tables. Because a growing number of voices, even authoritative ones, are arguing back. True Protestantization isn't where Paprocki thinks. And she offers concrete examples, not impressions. Just recently, in Germany for the first time, 2 women were appointed heads of an entire Catholic deanery. One priest remains moderator only to comply with canonical form. The two, in introducing themselves, said they wanted to embrace synodality, leading together, listening to the Spirit. But a deanery, led by lay people, with the priest reduced to a supporting role, for many seems very much like a Protestant community. And this is not an isolated case. It is the same world that blessed irregular couples with the document Fiducia Supplicans, that in Germany pushed for female priesthood and for lay people to preach at Mass. And national paths are multiplying, each with its own rules, as if the Church could have one doctrine in Germany and another in Africa. But a faith with variable geometry is, by definition, the opposite of Catholic unity. The world speaks of a synodal church, that is, a church that listens to everyone, discusses, and votes. And here, the parallel becomes impossible to ignore. Because the Protestant structure is exactly this: the community that decides, that votes, that reinterprets. The Catholic structure is the opposite: the church that receives and protects, and the bishops who teach. What's more, in many countries, repeated surveys show that a large portion of practicing Catholics no longer believe in the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist, the very heart of the Catholic faith. And this, historically, is precisely what the 16th century reformers denied. It's not just traditionalists who say it. Cardinal Müller, a man who knows the doctrine well as a former custodian, said it in very strong terms. Regarding the German synodal path, Müller said it had embarked on the path of Protestantization, and that the criteria of Catholic ecclesiology have been lost. These are the words of a cardinal, not a blog. And here's the paradox served up. On the one hand, the society is accused of being Protestant because it preserves everything the Church has always done: the Mass, the sacraments, doctrine, without changing a thing. On the other hand, it is said A church is being built that seems to truly imitate those Protestants, in the assemblies that deliberate, in the lay people who lead, in the new blessings, in the language of rites. The two images, placed side by side, cannot both be true. Either someone who changes nothing is a Protestant, or someone who changes everything is a Protestant. And common sense here has a pretty clear idea. Because historically, Protestantism wasn't born from those who preserved the Mass of all time. It was born from those who wanted to reform, simplify, replace the altar with the assembly. The roots of the word matter. 5 centuries ago, Luther wanted a church closer to the people. Latin was eliminated, the sacraments were reduced, the altar transformed into a table, the priest made a president of the assembly. Anyone who looks at certain liturgies today will readily find similarities. Let's stop, though, because we risk cheering and missing the truth. And the truth, as often happens, is more inconvenient for everyone. We agree with Paprocki on one point that remains valid. Consecrating bishops without the Pope's mandate is a grave act of disobedience, and the society is not without responsibility. Calling only oneself the true church is a real risk, and some fall for it. But let's also agree with the other side on an equally solid point. A church that reshapes itself according to the logic of the assembly, of votes, and of worldly fashions betrays its nature much more than those who simply kneel, as has always been done. So perhaps the word Protestant, used as an insult by both, doesn't help anyone. It's a convenient weapon, thrown around and explaining nothing. The real question is not who is Protestant, but another, deeper one: who remains faithful to the deposit received, and who instead reworks it according to their own taste. Because fidelity isn't measured by formal obedience alone, nor by attachment to the past alone. It's measured by one thing. Do you preserve what you've received, or do you change it? But precisely because we love the Church and its leader, we cannot ignore the paradox that the accusation of Protestantism today risks hurting the one who launches it more than the one who receives it. So, what remains for those who look at all this from the outside? The certainty remains that the Church is not a parliament and will never truly become one, that the 53,000 groups that sprang up through division are not a model, but a stern warning, and that true unity is not built by changing one's faith to follow the world, but by humbly preserving it even when it costs. Everyone's task remains, not to be drawn into the fan base, but to return to the essentials: a well-received Mass, the received doctrine, the true sacraments. That's where you see who's Catholic, not in labels. And there remains one prayer, one that must be made seriously, that the Pope and the pastors bring clarity, so that no one will have to ask themselves who, in the Church, is truly safeguarding the faith and who is dissolving it. Because when everyone in a house accuses each other of being strangers, perhaps the time has come to reopen the gospel and remember where we come from and who called us. What do you think? If you liked the video, comment, Amen. God bless you.